Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is the 10th and last episode in our series, The Human Condition. And as always, I would like to point out to the newcomers that they should watch the previous episodes if they want to follow along, because we discussed quite difficult concepts, and since we can't repeat everything in every episode, I would advise you to go back and watch the first 9 episodes in that case, in order to catch up with the rest of us. Okay, so I feel I owe you a little bit of an explanation. It's been a while since I talked about this stuff, and in the meantime I was sort of busy with my own issues. I tried to work through painful stuff that comes up, I think, in everybody's life. I tend to work through that by first of all expressing it, and I discovered that videos are one of the ways in which I can express what's happening, and in so doing I'm hoping to sort of show that that I'm not some warlock on the hill, that is exempt from pain, or exempt from regular life, but I'm just a normal person that is trying to make sense of it all. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So anyway, just for myself, I tried to recap a little bit what we've been discussing last time. Last time we focused in on what's happening when, out of the ground of all being, consciousness sort of enters any type of body, for that matter, but the human body. So the first thing we said that probably happens is a type of manifestation, so where consciousness is embodied in a body. And we then have, I said we don't want to discuss whether or not that happens before actual birth, in order to sort of avoid this whole religious question. But I think we could safely say that the baby primarily is manifest awareness. So if there is a sense of I, it's probably not conscious of the I yet, as of yet, but that happens in a sort of second step, and that's the entification phase, where the human or the infant becomes aware of being embodied, and becomes aware of there being interactions between itself and what it perceives as others. And that probably happens around the age, or up until the age of 3 years or minus 3 years. And that's where we become also aware of the I as being an agent or a doer. So apparently whatever the I does has an effect in the world. We then have a third step, and that's the personification bit, and I think that's what's happening in those very formative years of childhood, maybe until one is an adult. So it also encapsulates adolescence, and in that personification phase, the I is prone to develop a sort of idea of superiority or self-importance. And with time, when one is an adult and goes on with one's life, holding this kind of identification, victimization is prone to occur, because when there is a sense of I-ness and a sense of otherness, that's sort of like the basis for there to be suffering. Because when you have a sense of I, then you are prone to attach yourself to things that you want, and to people that you want and that you long for or look for. And on the other hand, you're prone to push away things that you don't want, or that you don't seem to be matching your person, and that's where the whole conflict bit starts. So obviously this all happens in the dimension of space-time, or 4D as we call it, and in quantum mechanics or quantum field theory terms, we would attribute this to also being a local thing happening. So it's bound to space-time. And time also, as we can sort of glean from that, is very much connected to your sense of I, and your sense of personal history, and of when, of memories, and your sort of like your personal history, right? So it's very much bound to your sense of I-ness. We also discussed numerous times how there's probably at all times, but I will go a little bit more into that after what I'm trying to say right now, is that there's probably always a chance to pierce through to other dimensions, which we coined as 5D plus, so there's 6 dimensions, the 7th dimension, the 8th, the 9th, whatever. We don't know how many there really are, but as we also said about numerous times, modern science suggests anywhere between, I think, 11 or 20 dimensions that can be at least mathematically proven. So in that sort of space where there isn't any time, and where there isn't any material extension in terms of space, we're not sure what there really is in terms of if there's still some sort of sense of personality, personhood, or I-ness. I personally think there isn't, but who am I to claim any kind of absolute truth? So I'm more of a believer of that type of realm, or those type of realms, to be more of an abstract and fundamental and absolute nature, much like Plato already suggested, whatever 5,000 years ago, or how many thousand years ago that was. That is the realm of the pure forms. And numerous philosophers after that made reference to that absolute realm, or there having to be sort of like an absolute realm that's different from the realm we normally move in. So I think so basically when we are in the sense of I-ness, or in that sense of being an entity that is separate from everybody else, I think we have a chance to pierce through into these other dimensions, but it's really tied to being in one, like in the absolute now. So if we manage to, by way of, for instance, meditation, empty our minds from all kinds of content, if you will, and even if the content of the of the sense of I-ness, then we can probably pierce through these other dimensions. So it's a very fine, I don't know how to draw that, but it's like a very fine line one has to move, on. I mean, it's really in the now, you know, it's only in the now that you can sort of pierce through that. And what I think is also the case is that, and here I come back to what I just experienced a couple of weeks ago. You know, if you're somewhere in those areas where you're both identified with the person you have become and you think you are, and you are hurting because of whatever happened to you, if you're in that pain or in that moment of pain, obviously it's very hard for you to be in the now. If you're in pain, then you're not in the now, because then you're identified with some sort of past event that caused you pain, and or you're anticipating some future event that causes you pain or anxiety. So it would be very hard. The more you go to this side, the more you sort of go the way of identification, it becomes harder and harder to do that piercing through. So chances are you will have to find your way back to the state of being, let's call it a state of being, a very childlike state of being, you know, where you sort of where you pursue the attributes that we pursue, that we associate with the positivity of childhood. And I think even, you know, ancient texts such as the Bible remind us, be like the children. And I think that's what really is meant with that, is that we have to go back to this really unassuming nature and to this really transpersonal nature, if you will. And we really have to be able to experience life very much in the moment. And we have to not so much make a difference between ourselves and what we perceive as other beings. So I think the more we are able to move back into that stage of the infant or child, albeit in a very informed version of the infant or child, I think that's where we have a chance to actually pierce through these other dimensions. Now, in that university script that I also mentioned numerous times, that's called the Course in Consciousness. I will again link this in the description box. There was also talk about this, you know, a sage precisely is at this point where he or she is again like the infant. So if you want to, this is how you, so this is how a human being probably normally evolves, is that this manifestation or embodiment happens, and the identification happens, the personification happens, victimization might or might not happen, but is very likely to happen, and then you sort of slowly and you know, with a lot of work, find your way back to that manifestation stage. And obviously when you die, you know, who knows what happens, but you probably dissolve back into this space of, or not non-space of the ground of all being, which in this channel we think is consciousness itself. Yeah. Right. So I feel that one of the questions that I haven't been able to resolve for myself as of yet is the question whether when you move from where one moves from 4D to 5D and further, if there's still some sort of sense of identity or personification, you know. And if you think of all the concepts that we are sort of used to, you know, the concept of a soul being some sort of thing, albeit not material, but we conceive of a soul as a, I don't know, as a confined something, you know, that's non-material, but that's nevertheless able to sort of travel beyond this material and space-time sort of dimension. And I myself struggle right now a lot with the concept of a soul precisely because we tend to look at the soul as being some encapsulated thing different from any other presumed soul that there might also be. So either we got the concept of soul wrong all along, you know, by thinking that it's by sort of upholding this idea of thingness and duality, you know. So either we got this wrong and it's, or I don't know, or it could be that it could be that when consciousness departs from a body, it does so in this discrete way, in that, well, when we were embodied, we were obviously within space-time. There was some sort of discreteness in that the body has some boundaries, right? So you would think that whatever goes out of the body also is sort of like confined or discrete. So maybe in, let's say, 5D, there's like, I don't know, there's still some sort of entity or entityness, right, that we could liken with the soul. And maybe it takes time for that to dissolve. I mean, it doesn't take time because we're out of space-time, but you see how limited our language is here really when you talk about these concepts. But so maybe there's some sort of pathway that we go through, or natural cycle or whatever, that any embodied piece of consciousness goes through, for lack of a better term, in order to sort of dissolve back into this vast ocean of consciousness. Obviously, you can see how many concepts are tied to the question of whether there is a soul or not, and whether that's to be, or to the question whether a soul is to be considered an entity separate from other soul entities or not. There's this whole question of reincarnation that, you know, age-old traditions such as Buddhism that I would claim to subscribe to, you know, claim to that there to be reincarnations. So one would assume that whatever, you know, reincarnates is some kind of entity, right? So and that this entity sort of reincarnates into different bodies and has different experiences, and that somehow those memories that are stored locally in that bodily brain are also stored somewhere else, so that when the thing reincarnates, it sort of reincarnates with the same sort of programming, right? And there have been cases, you know, when you research reincarnation, there have been cases reported where apparently children remembered their previous incarnations and could pinpoint, you know, specific locations and people and names and all that kind of stuff. So there seems to be something to that concept. Still, I struggle with it. I struggle with this idea of entification and discreteness to go into dimensions other than 4D. I think it's precisely the limitation that we have in this dimension, you know, the fact that we all are in a body and that we therefore perceive ourselves as finite, in sort of encapsulated in those bodies that we have, and that we consider ourselves separate from all the other bodies that there are. So I think that's sort of like the big mistake that everybody's been making so far, to think that one could, you know, take that concept of discreteness and duality into other realms. I think, well, obviously we will never know, or it will be hard to prove whatever is the case, but I would like to offer you an alternative view, and I think that's also sort of the key, or that's sort of like the evolutionary step that I personally think that humanity should be able to take right now, lest it doesn't want to destroy itself, and that is to actually get over the illusion of, like, to become conscious of the illusion of duality, and to really understand that we all are, albeit individual expressions, but that we all are sort of expressions of the same one consciousness that is also the ground of all being. So, and I think if we could live from such a perspective, then we would have a lot less problems, because the whole idea of I-ness and otherness and duality would maybe not disappear completely, but would take would just have a lot less meaning, you know. And if you could just take, you know, I mean, if you could just take, I guess, a day or so and retreat somewhere in the woods and just sit by yourself and just consider the option that we could actually, you know, that we could actually let go of this conception of I-ness and otherness and duality, what kind of world then would we be able to live in, and what would we be able to accomplish together, and how would we go about accomplishing that, you know, by what kind of ethics would we have then, what kind of basic principles would we live by, what kind of laws would we live by, and I think those are really important questions, especially for our time, and I think they're worthwhile thinking about and writing about and making videos about, and that's why I'm here on YouTube. Also, I don't want to make this a sort of ivory tower type of channel where, you know, I don't want to claim that I'm some philosopher that's you know, that's sort of not in the world. Obviously I'm in the world and I have issues as everybody else does, and I think that's really important to consider when thinking about these things, because in the end, you know, the theory that we might come up with, a theory or a concept we might come up with, is only as helpful as it is able to, you know, address as many people as possible, wherever they are in this sort of spectrum of identification. So if I go back to the beginning, when I talked about the fact that sometimes I'm quite distraught, and I documented that in one of my videos, I think 2 weeks ago that was, where, you know, obviously human beings can be in a lot of pain, and whatever theory we come up with needs to address that also. I think if you, for instance, if you met a depressed person and you would tell the depressed person, look, it's all very simple. There's the key to everything is non-duality, and your sense of I-ness is an illusion, so you shouldn't be in pain anymore. So you're not going to reach that person at all. And that's what maybe that's what I wanted to prove to myself, making that video 2 weeks ago, is that to sort of encapsulate that moment in time, to where I can even go back myself and see how distraught I was and how little all of this would make sense to me in that kind of moment, right? So yes, I can meditate. Sometimes I can meditate. Sometimes I feel that I'm in absolute peace, and I might sometimes even feel that I'm able to pierce through these to these other dimensions and get some sort of, a channel, if you will, some sort of information, precisely because I'm not in that sense of I-ness then. It's more like here's the limitation of our language again. I allow for things to just flow through me. So I know that kind of state of being, but then I also know that kind of state of being very well, and that kind of state has preoccupied the first 46 years of my life, pretty much. So I want to make this really clear, that I do wish to, whatever I'm doing, I do wish to provide things that are actually helpful and not just some empty concept, that only a sage or a philosopher or scientist could access. So yeah. I want to say something else about this whole question of soul and thingness, because I thought, well, if we go back and take the concept of the mind-brain that Amit Goswami postulated and that we sort of picked up in the last episodes, which, if we draw it really simply, is the concept of the mind-brain, right? And that mind-brain is, if we draw it quite simply again, has two, so the human brain, according to Amit Goswami, has two sort of like operating systems that it can work under. And the first operating system is the local and space-time bound, 4D bound type of, very how do I say, mechanistical, like trigger response type of brain, right? And the other part of the brain, or the mind brain, is the non-local 5D plus type of aspect, if you will, of same brain. And if we think of it as, I think the best way to think about it is operating system, right? So we have this operating system that we can use in space-time, so we can actually operate, and part of that operating system is the sense of I-ness, right? But then clearly human beings have the potential to also have a parallel to the 4D operating system, an operating system that is advanced, or that taps into a higher states of consciousness, if you will, that taps into states of transpersonal consciousness, if you will, also. And if I try to tie that to the concept of soul, then I would say what in the past we thought of as soul, is that very operating system that human beings also have the chance to tap into. And I think when you think of it like that, it starts to make a lot of sense. So, and to take this one little step further, is if you think in Christian terms, if you think of the devil, and if you think of God and the angels and all that kind of stuff. And so I think this realm, this 4D realm, or this 4D operating system, if you focus in on that too much, and if you become very identified with that local part of you and that person that you become over time, then that's what probably is meant by, the biblical devil, right? And on the other hand, if you are tapped into that transpersonal kind of higher consciousness, then that is probably what we in the past called God. And you see how in the past we tied the devil as well as God as being some sort of entity. We tied those concepts, if you will, also to the concept of entification. And I think that is what we need to start to let go of. So I'm not saying we should let go of the idea of God, because obviously there is something greater than just one manifested embodiment of consciousness in a body, right? So there obviously there is much more, and even if we took the sum of all the manifested bodies together, that whatever God is, or whatever we called God so far, is probably more than the sum of all these individual embodied souls. So to provide sort of like a modern way of looking at things, if you will, I would probably say that, I would probably call God source consciousness. And by source consciousness, I mean also the ground of all being. And I would call the devil the individual ego, or the sort of, I mean, to be the devil obviously is like to be already quite far advanced into, the very one side of the spectrum, be really ego-minded, be really have a lot of self-importance and all that kind of stuff, be a narcissist and all those kinds of things that we hear about so much these days. So basically, every human being has the chance to, to run, if you will, on both operating systems. And it's about it's about putting the focus on either one or the other. And of course, if you go to the grocery store and you have to do groceries, it's best to be in 4D consciousness in this type of operating system, so you can actually get your groceries, But you should also probably spend some time each day tapping into this higher state of consciousness, which requires you to be in the now, which, according to this idea, requires you to, having worked through any past pain you might have, that keeps you in this place of personification and identification with your personal history. Yeah. So I think that pretty much sums up what I've been thinking about for the past 2 or 3 weeks. That's also why I hesitated to come on sooner, because I wanted to make sure, it's always like I call these downloads and I think I get them, I don't want to sound too self-important here, but it's just I'm trying to explain to myself what is happening, and I think sometimes I'm able to access this, and I get ideas that clearly couldn't be my own. They come from somewhere else, and I first have to sort of, you know, see what I do with that kind of information and process it, if you will. And only when I processed it, I'm able to actually talk about it. And I think there comes a point where you can't actually talk about the experiences that you have in that kind of space because there is no words for them, and it's probably best if you don't talk about them and if you just have these experiences and appreciate them, you know. And yeah, I think I'm going to be curious. I hope you guys are going to comment somewhat and contribute your own thoughts. It feels like a rather lonely ride so far, and of course I'm hoping to engage in conversation with you guys whenever possible. So yeah, I'd appreciate if you could just, you know, let me know what your thoughts are, and I'm gonna just kick back and wait for whatever the next thing is that comes to this, you know, flowing sort of state of being. And yeah, I'm sure I'm gonna have things to talk about again. Okay, so you guys take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.